Hey everybody, it's John Meyers from Write Better Together. Look everybody, it's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Meyers.
We interrupt this, whatever you're watching, for a commercial. A commercial? That sounds like the way I started the last commercial.
Well, is this the same commercial?
No, I know. So I was watching the internet, Emily, and
We're
on
watching the internet.
Yes. And on the internet, I learned that we were writing a book and that we were only a third of the way done.
We are.
And it didn't have a subtitle. And the book's done already. And it has a subtitle. So what's going on with our book, Emily?
So our book, you probably already know about it, is called Write Anyway.
Oh, yes.
Colon.
Oh, there's our colon again. That's so gross when you say colon in the middle of it.
Giving yourself permission to keep writing no matter what.
Yes, and it does. Good or bad, life happens. They're going to have it pretty soon.
Yeah, and covering everything. We're going to have a cover reveal. Then you get to hold it in your hands.
Yes.
If you buy the physical copy.
And if you come to Oklahoma City, it'll be your first opportunity to get us to autograph it for you.
Yeah. Have we mentioned that we're going to be at a writing conference in Oklahoma City, August 30th through September 2nd?
Teaching a master class.
So keep an eye out because it'll be there soon. It'll be in the world.
Out of its bubble. Our book is coming out of its bubble.
We'll have a new segment every week. Book, how did you get out of your bubble?
Welcome everybody to Write Better Together. I'm John Meyers. Hey, look everybody, it's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Meyers.
Hey, what are we talking about today?
We have quite the guest.
Yes, we do.
We have soon-to-be Dr. Hunter Little on to talk about her research on what happens when you incorporate conversations and communication about mental disabilities in the classroom.
She actually did a study.
She did a study, and it's fascinating. So, great conversation with Hunter. Before that, we're going to have call to action responses.
Yay.
Hunter's going to give a new, really excellent call to action.
Oh, yes.
We're going to have a Hey John Myers segment where I teach John Myers something, hopefully.
And gross me out with something?
Hopefully not. Okay. And then we're going to have the final act, which I've been preparing.
Oh, my goodness. I hope there's no F words in it.
Sometimes Riverside transcribes our conversations and has us just swearing the whole time, and it just is mishearing us, and it's hilarious. And sometimes I want to just keep that in the transcript, but no.
I'd be afraid that it would make us say those words.
Just have AI say it instead of swearing a bunch. No swearing on the podcast.
The thing about Hunter Little is we're really going to confuse the algorithms because in a couple of weeks we'll have Paul Gay talking about the little rascals. And this episode we have Hunter Little. It's not going to know what to do with the word little.
Nope.
All right. You got out of your bubble?
I did get out of my bubble. I went camping with my parents.
Oh my goodness.
And it was so nice. I left my laptop at home. I brought a book and read it way too fast. In fact, I was like, I should have brought another book. We had no service. At one point I went kayaking and I was like, should I bring my phone? Oh, wait, no, there's no point. If something happens, I can't contact you anyway. But we basically just kayaked the whole time and played Yahtzee and read books. And it was lovely. And I think that my takeaway from it is that sometimes getting out of your bubble doesn't have to be, it's not work related. It's just rest. Take time to rest. It's nice. It's rejuvenating.
You got out of all of it, everything, the whole
You're
world.
Right. In a way, I went into an even tighter bubble.
The kayak was your bubble.
The kayak became the bubble.
Oh my goodness.
And we saw birds. We did lots of kayaking that involved bird watching, so
the
very
yellow-winged warbler, perhaps.
A what?
I just made that up.
I mean, that's pretty similar to actual. We saw a prothonotary warbler.
Of course you did.
How did you get out of your bubble?
I got out of my bubble by doing one of our call to actions where you said, try to go get a rejection. And
Oh.
speaking of books, I don't ever submit books to anything. And you know how we're writing a book called,
Yeah.
what's it
Yeah.
called?
It's called
Write
Write
Anyway?
Anyway.
Well, I wrote another book anyway since the last time we talked, since last week. It's a book of poetry. Like, what the heck? And I'm not a poet. I'm a screenwriter. But the deadline was June 30th, and I'm not going to name the publishing company, but they were open for submissions. So I took bits and pieces of what was formerly the start of a novel, and crafted at least 50 poems. It may be 64 poems once I decide. I haven't done the front matter and the end matter yet for the book or the table of contents, but the book itself is done in a week. Amazing. And then I will hit submit on June 30th. I will not hit it a moment earlier. And how's that? Screenwriter boy decided he was going to submit a poetry book.
That's awesome. And so it's making me think that in an earlier episode we talked about like don't throw anything away.
Yeah.
And like that's like the definition of repurposing something. Like you turned something you had into something that was needed.
Well, yes, and there had to be some new glue in it, like to hold it together. And I didn't want it just to be 50 random poems. The other thing I discovered was, have you ever read Richard Brautigan's June 30th? So
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, I have 2 copies of it somewhere. It's now out of print, and I wanted to see how he put it together. Mine is obviously completely different, but I wanted to see how he assembled it and put it together. And they're like $1,200 now, $600, and because it's out of print. And
Wow.
I found an old, which I didn't buy, but I found an old beat up one for $50. But most of them are like 300, 200, 1,200 for mint condition.
My goodness.
And I have 2 of them in this house somewhere, and
Oh
I
my
can't find
gosh.
them.
You definitely need to find. That's like I had a okay, you may not know the significance of this, but some people out there will. I had a holographic Charizard card.
Wow.
From when I was like 6 years old. Didn't even know the significance of it, but my parents were like, "Keep that." And I kept it for a long time and then I lost it.
I
And I'm
have
devastated.
this, which I believe you might even have a copy somewhere. And
Do I?
but this is now out of print, and it was
How to read
$30 at the
Nancy?
time.
How to read Nancy, the
You don't
elements
have
of
that book?
comics. No.
You weren't in that class?
No, I wasn't in the comic class.
Oh, okay. So you don't have it. So
Nope.
it was $30 at the time. It's now out of print, and it's $150, $200. But
Wow.
this is a fan, like, everyone, it's worth the $150. So go buy it, because it will change your life as far as storytelling is concerned. Someday I'll hold up the June 30th if I ever find it. That was it. I
Sweet.
went out on the poetry limb.
Well, I can't wait to hear what happens. All right, so we have call to action responses.
Oh yeah.
So in one of our episodes, the art versus product episode, we talked about audience, and we had Rick Rubin. What was Rick Rubin's perspective?
That the audience doesn't matter, and how dare you consider the audience.
And then we had Jacob Collier.
That you consider the audience from the very inception of your idea.
So we had a call to action to respond to take a side. So this is a response to that from my sister, Bethany Hale. Thank you, Bethany. She actually says, I don't really agree with Rick or Jacob. Can I be in Camp John Myers?
Yes, you can.
She says, I think that audience doesn't matter in the context that you shouldn't cater to or change your work based on the lowest common denominator just to reach more people. But, capital letters, you should still keep in mind who you're writing for because your work doesn't exist in a vacuum. And I definitely agree that there isn't just one way to do things, but the craft of writing exists in a tradition that goes back hundreds of years, and we are building off of that.
Brilliant. That Bethany.
Yeah, she's She's smart. By the way, everybody, if you have opinions on that, then let us know. We had another response. So every Monday we do self promos.
Yes.
On Facebook. So everybody, please share your work and your crafting or whatever you're doing on those pages. We got a response from Ashley Hargrove.
We know her. We met her in person.
We did. And she shared on our promo page, or on our promo post.
Yes.
Marriage Bites is a horror comedy about a married couple trying to rebuild their marriage while suddenly facing the husband being turned into a vampire.
Oh my gosh, I hate when that happens. Based on a true story, apparently.
Struggling to stay alive gets pretty hard when they test various social media theories and try to protect their town while having no clue at what they're doing. By the way, this could also be considered a response to our other call to action of sharing your log line.
Oh, yes, it could be.
Right? Because that's a log line right there. The Full of Vampire Puns film was featured in Indie Rap magazine with all kinds of perks and can do regular contributions. Happy with just sharing. And then she says, join. I'm going to get these names wrong. Joe Comera, myself, Darren Ewing, Sean C. Phillips, Nicole Butler Vegas, Daniel Emery Taylor, Wynn Reichert, Joseph Bodkin, aka Pongo the Demon Clown, and many more as the fangs come out. We film at the Thunderdome Studios, Studio Huntsville, and more. And she says marriage is about to bite pretty hard.
So all the way from Huntsville, Alabama, wound up in our little self-promo thing.
Yeah.
What platform? I don't remember. What platform is she fundraising on? And we'll put the link in the show notes.
It's Indiegogo.com.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And yeah, so we can share that with everybody.
If anyone knows Dr. Ted Hovitt, now retired, and he lives in Minneapolis, he hates puns. So we need to make sure that he hears that he's aware of this project.
Looking at the log line as well, it's just so funny. And I mean, I think it's good that it said horror comedy at the very beginning, because if it didn't, I would probably just be like, well, that's it. If it's taken too seriously, it's like too much for me. But knowing it's a comedy makes you just to laugh at the line, like about the husband being turned into a vampire. It's just funny. It's a funny concept.
Yeah, I think it's going to do well. Speaking of doing well,
here's our conversation with Hunter Little.
She's done so well for herself.
She has. We're proud of her.
Hey, look, Emily Brooks is still here. Hey, look, everybody, it's Emily Brooks. Who's this other extra person?
Hi, everybody. This is Hunter Little.
Hunter Little.
Welcome to the podcast.
How'd she get here?
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited for you to be here. It's so good to see you. So for those of you who don't know, Hunter is a fourth-year PhD student in the English department at the University of Washington, studying language and rhetoric. Her research works to forge connections between the fields of disability studies, writing studies, and knowledge transfer research. More specifically, she is interested in using knowledge transfer principles to promote the uptake and adaptation of knowledge about mental disability within and outside of the writing classroom. When she isn't researching and writing, she enjoys reading nonfiction, despite her history as a poet, going for long walks, even in the PNW rain, baking, crafting, spending quality time with friends, and video chatting with her Midwest residing relatives. Her frequently used affirmations have been "keep moving forward" and "all progress is good progress."
Welcome, Hunter.
I love.
Thank you. I share those affirmations. Well, thank you for having me on the podcast, first and foremost. But I love those affirmations and sharing them with people, especially my students. A lot of them say they don't even know what an affirmation is. So that's always fun. And I also always think of John Meyers' favorite word, nevertheless.
Nevertheless.
I love that.
Yeah. So, okay. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I think it's been really cool to see just like how you're building this community, bringing people together to talk about these important and interesting and exciting topics. And like I was saying, John Meyers asked me to join you after I presented some of my research to the faculty at the English department at the University of Washington. Since that presentation, the work has developed a little bit more, but it's still an incomplete project. I'm not going to finish my PhD until next year. And also really important to keep in mind, like all of the data interpretations are from one perspective. So like, obviously it's just from my perspective, and there's other ways it could be interpreted, but based on like the theories and frameworks I'm using, that'll be kind of what I share. But yeah, do you want me to just go ahead and like get into it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I want to hear all of it. Yes. What were you going to say, John Meyers?
Well, I was going to say yes. And, but I also know that Hunter names her plant, so I want to know the name of the plant that's over her shoulder.
You're distracted by the plant. I love it.
I just want to know its name.
It actually doesn't have one. This is not my. This is Brett's plant because I'm at his house. But yeah, maybe I should name it today while he's gone. And
yes.
That'll be the extra Patreon question that people have to pay the big money to find out the name of the plant.
I'll think of one as I'm talking through the project.
All right.
Okay.
Continue.
Anyway, so I'm just gonna do like a share out of my central research questions. I have a lot of them. I think overall I had 13 research questions, but I'm just gonna share a few of them. And then I'll provide some definitions that I feel like are really central to understanding what I'm even talking about, because it can get like really theoretical and confusing sometimes, even for me as someone who's studying it. And then I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the data analysis, because I don't think any of your viewers are really going to want to know about that. And then I'll just share a couple of findings and like things that are developing in my findings chapters. And like I was saying, I'll have like some quotes and other things that I have to share from students and then also other scholars. I'm also not really used to it being like really informal. Every time I've talked about it, it's had to be like very like stiff and like
that makes sense.
So it feels really like I'm like, okay, I can say this in a fun way. I can be excited about it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, thinking back, I think the two of you know about some of my like history, like my mental health journey from undergrad. And a lot of my research was inspired by those like adverse mental health experiences. We talked a little bit about my mom, and then just like other traumas that happened that made that time of my life really difficult to adjust to. A lot of changes were happening, but it was made a lot easier by one of my professors, my writing professor, my first year writing professor, Jeff Hillard at Mount St. Joseph University. And I also just found like a lot of solace and like relief in writing poetry in his class. And his support in classroom was just like so pivotal for me in terms of like what I wanted to do with my life, and like has really impacted how I want to be with my students and in the classroom. Like, I don't think I would have been like so definitive, like, oh, I definitely want to teach if I hadn't had him as my professor that year. Or the 2 of those years I was at that university for 2 years and then transferred, but absolutely wonderful person. Should Google him. He's retired now, but really love him. So yeah, like Emily was saying, my research merges 3 fields: writing studies, disability studies, and then knowledge transfer studies. And really the deepest thing, like at its core, my research, what I want my research to do is make college experiences better for students with mental disabilities, or those who experience mental disability symptoms, whether that's like permanently or temporarily. So that's what's at the root of all of this. And I hope that all kind of comes together, makes sense by the end of this conversation. But my big central research question was what happens in the writing classroom when we center discourses of disability and mental disability specifically. And then, like I said, there was a lot of sub-questions that followed that. I had 2 sub-questions, and then those sub-questions had their own sub-questions, which came out to 13 total questions. And I had like some that were more like transfer study focused, which I'll share just 2 of them. I'm not going to give you all of my research questions because you don't need that. But one of them was, what changes occur when students are reading and writing about mental disability, and to what extent can these changes prepare students for future engagement with mental disability? And I'll kind of just go into the definitions now, which again will involve some quoting. But mental disability is a term that I was surprised to learn that people in my department were like hearing for the first time when I did this presentation. It kind of just felt like it was new to me when I learned it like a few years ago, but I was like, oh, all of like these really, they're so educated and so brilliant and just like incredible. Not that they're not incredible if they don't know the term, but like, I guess I had made an assumption that they would know what I meant when I said mental disability, but it was new, so I'm going to define that anyway. So I take the definition I use from the disability studies scholar Margaret Price, and she defines it as a term, as, quote, a term encompassing cognitive, intellectual, and psychiatric disabilities, mental illness, madness, and autism, as well as brain injury and psychiatric survivorship, end quote. And I use that because it's just like very inclusive of all different abilities, and it also is inclusive of people who might not have the privilege of getting an official diagnosis to like be labeled as disabled through like accommodation services and things like that. So I like the just like all-encompassing nature of that term. Although there is some contention like about whether it should be called that, particularly amongst my students, which has been really interesting. Because like the term disability just feels different for some of them, I guess. But the knowledge transfer, so transfer studies are pretty central to the field of writing studies, because one of the goals of writing courses is to make writing skills transferable to other areas, right? You know this. But it's transfer studies have been conducted since around like 1901. It's like the first documented transfer studies. And transfer has largely been understood as, quote, when learning in one context or with one set of materials impacts on performance in another context or with other related materials, end quote. So that might look like how someone takes their like storytelling skills from script writing or fiction writing courses and then adapts them to structure like the findings of their research, which is actually something that like is helpful as a creative writer to go in and do when you're writing your findings. But the really cool thing about transfer is that it's been really like positively complicated or problematized and seen as like less discrete instances of taking like specific knowledge across these disparate contexts in like the way that teachers and researchers expect it to be and how they expect it to look. But we're starting to see it more as like really subtle and variable, and it depends a lot on like students' experiences and dispositions and just like the different actors and elements of our environments. And for example, the classroom has a lot of those different actors and elements. So what I focus on a lot in my research, or what I am aiming for my focus to be and what I want to build on, is actually the work of another UW graduate. He now works as faculty, Dylan London Medina, and his dissertation was where the concept of microtransfer came up or was developed, and that kind of stemmed out of these conversations like boundary work, which I'm not going to get into too much, but he defines microtransfer as, quote, the moment-to-moment interactions where dispositions form, end quote. And this means that like microtransfers are those like instances when those different elements and actors come together, and then both of those things or all of those things that are intersecting change in some way, and therefore boundaries are being marked between like who am I and what is this piece of writing and who are my peers, or like for example defining what counts as mental disability would be a way of like boundary marking. Incredible dissertation. It is available to the public if you want to read it.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
We will. We'll put a link to it. We have teachers who I think would be really interested in that. So
yeah, it's so good. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really like, I don't read dissertations, or like, I don't want anyone to read my dissertation, because your dissertation is not your best work. It's just like
right.
putting your foot in the door. But I love reading dissertations. I think they're so fun.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, they're so fun. And the people at the University of Washington, they've like done some of the coolest like transfer work. But yeah, same guy says that while on a macro level, transfer might look like moving knowledge and skills or transitioning from one context to another. More specifically, it is a series of microtransfers. And so those microtransfers then like are, like I said, just like continually changing how students like see themselves, like the value they place on knowledge, and whether they like take it up and place it within their repertoire, how they use it, and how they see it like in relation to themselves. So that's where all that kind of comes together. So my research, because I had human subjects in my research study, I had to get International Review Board approval, which I thought was going to be a lot more difficult of a process than it was. But I did get exemption, and so I was able to like work with my human subjects, which are just participants or like co-readers.
Sounds so ominous.
Well, so I do have a question. So I had to do that for folk studies, and it back then it was 9 1-hour classes, and then you had a test at each one, and you had to get over 80% or 90% on each of the 9 tests. And are you saying it's easier now?
Yeah, I just had to get like a like certificate, like a training certificate, and like that I did online. And then I shouldn't say just, like obviously I took it very seriously because I care about my students and protecting them and things like that. But yeah, I filled out like this very long protocol. I don't remember how many pages, but it's a lot of pages. And then I submitted it, and they sent back some like revisions and questions that I had to like edit and then send back again. And then they were like, oh yeah, you're exempt. And so I was able to, then follow the protocol. It's pretty
interesting,
pretty easy.
Nice.
As I was filling out the protocol, I was also designing my courses, which was English 110, and that's called Critical Composition. And then the second course that I designed is English 281, and that's an intermediate expository writing course. The first course, the English 110 class, was the pilot study. So it was a way for me to like test things out and see what I could change and improve for the second study, which is like the central study that I talk about in my dissertation. But what I did for those courses is I like was really intentional about including like not only stories and representations of mental disability within the academy, but teaching disability studies discourse and knowledge so that they understood, like they were thinking about it critically and socially and medically, and not just like medically. So I spent a lot of time working on how to like frame the class to inspire or support the transfer of that knowledge. Like in retrospect, I should have spent a lot more time thinking toward like the interactions, but there's so many interactions in a writing class. Like it's kind of natural in the writing class. So looking at my data now, it's been like, oh, of course, the writing class is the best place to do this because we have discussions, we have one-on-one conferences, we do a lot of reading and writing and free writing and all of those different forms I would consider all of those like opportunities for microtransfer as well. I'll talk, I think, just specifically about the second study at this point. My second study, the English 281 class, consisted of 14 students who signed up to do the study, one of which was removed from the study for having not completed all but like 2 assignments. And then, so I had 13 in total, and 5 of those 13 did interviews with me. So I collected all of their in and out of class writing, survey responses, and then interviews if they did them. And then to analyze the first study, I like went through this big long process of like something called, so I did like open coding, and then I did process coding, which is really just like using gerunds to develop codes, which are categories for like making sense of the data. That's very simplified. It's just a very like iterative process. But I did that for the first one, and I learned that I didn't really love that method. And I did also like some quantification with that study, and I also didn't like that, and it wasn't really useful. So it's all qualitative at this point. And for that central study, I leaned more into in vivo coding, which is where you like use the students' own words to develop those coding categories. And then I started coming up with themes. So from those students' words, I developed themes, and now I'm in the process of like using discourse analysis to look specifically at their like, yeah, how they're talking about the things and what conclusions I can make. So my findings chapters are broken down by theme. So I believe right now my plan is to have 3 themes per chapter. So I have 2 findings chapters. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my first theme, which is relationships to disability. And just some other themes are things like agents of change, rhetorical awareness, and specialized knowledge. So those are all going to show up somewhere in my writing. But I chose 3 students to talk about for that first theme, so relationships to disability. And I'm going to refer to the 2 that I talk about by their pseudonyms, because that's how I would refer to them in my dissertation, and I want to protect them. And these students entered my class with like varying degrees of disability knowledge and experience. And I'm going to talk about 2 students who like had really interesting juxtapositions of like their prior knowledge about mental disability. So yeah, I'm just going to get into that. And the first one is Ethan Heiss. This is my only student who chose his pseudonym, and he had a first and last name, which was really fun. So I was really excited to have Ethan participate in the study because he was super engaged in class. Like there were just a lot of really cool things about Ethan. Like he entered the class with accommodations from Disability Resources for Students. So I knew he had some diagnoses and needed like materials from class posted on Canvas, which I always do anyway for accessibility. But I had some awareness of like that history as he came into the class, but he was always like super engaged and active in our conversations. So great student. And then he also completed the interview. And when we were doing the interview, I was really intrigued that because he went on to share like his like family history and then his like experience being diagnosed. So he ended up disclosing a diagnosis of bipolar 2, ADHD, and OCD, but like says at some point you stop caring about the labels and you're just focused on like, you know, mitigating the symptoms throughout your days. So I
have a question. So when you found that out, the semester's over, or you're in the middle of the semester? The semester's completely over.
No, it was at the end of the semester.
So at the end of the semester.
Close to the end. It was probably week 7, and we have 10 weeks. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you design this course with research as a goal, and plus the course as a goal as well, right? So it has 2 goals, and then 7 weeks into a 10 weeks course, you find out new information that you didn't know in weeks 1 through 7.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
Continue.
super cool because we did a lot of reading on like mental disability and disability studies. But we also talked about a lot of other things like colonialism in research and citational politics and like feminist killjoys and like just this whole range of other things you want to think about when you're doing research. But they were required to have their research topic inspired out of something from our class discussions. So it could be like really loose, like super broad, as long as they could make an argument about it. So Ethan had already said some stuff about his history and like his experience with mental disability, but it's never as specific as it was when we got into the interview in week 7. So I did learn like a lot more from him. And it was really interesting because his experience was so similar to mine. And like, I don't like to make the interviews about me, but when he shared, I was like, listen, I'm going to say this very quickly, but like that was scary, similar to exactly like what my trajectory was, receiving my diagnoses. And so I felt just like really excited to have him as an interviewee, but also as like a participant in the study generally, because like I want people like me as an undergrad, like who I was in that space and time, like she needed a course like this, I feel like. And I was really excited to see how that might have impacted somebody in a similar like space. Although he's much more like literate in like mental disability than I was at that time. I like basically knew nothing because my family didn't talk about it, although there was very obvious issues over time. But Ethan was like just really like insightful. He asked a lot of questions over email, and just like trusted the process, and I really admired that and was excited about that. But one of the big things that changed in his relationship with disability, like I said, he came in with like really advanced disability literacy. He had done a lot of his own research on his mental disabilities, so he knew a lot about what he had been diagnosed with and how those things interacted and how it impacted who he was, and helped him kind of understand other people in different ways. But the really special thing that he said in his interview was, quote, "In general, it's like the understanding of mental disability was no longer limited to my personal experience, and I think that was kind of a breakthrough," end quote. Later, he said that, quote, his prior understanding of mental health challenges was purely informed by his personal experiences. And although his initial understanding was not wrong, this class caused him to realize his narrow perspective, end quote.
Wow.
So, yeah, I know. It's so cool. Like, it's, yeah, just really exciting because he, I don't know, had this disposition. Like, it shows that disposition is really important. He didn't come in with like, he knew a lot, but he wasn't like so expert. He was closed off to learning more. And so, it just like really reinforced, that idea about dispositions being important for transfer. And then like the idea that knowledge transfer is very social. And also that when something's already like relevant and meaningful in your life, you're more likely to make meaning out of knowledge that's related to that and then also use it later. So really, really cool for him to share that as well. And I'm not going to talk very much about the boundary work stuff because we're not going to have time. So I'm just going to kind of move on quickly. Let me see where I'm at. I'm going to skip over all this stuff. He did have a lot of influence from like the course readings on so there was like a lot of interaction between like the course readings, his personal experience, and then class discussions, as well as like things happening in popular media that led to his research project. He did research on like he wanted to analyze media representations of like mental disability as it's talked about in relation to Kanye West.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was like really, really interesting. And he had to like, he was very just like careful about it too. Not like, hey, I support the things he said, but I'm trying to see this from a perspective of like, people are kind of blaming it on his bipolar diagnosis, and that's not necessarily what is happening or what has to be happening based on what we know. And yeah, so it was a cool paper. Well, they did websites, so it was a cool website. So I'll talk quickly about Peter, although I'm very excited about Peter. And I am very excited about Peter because he surprised me. He was really engaged in class discussion. He actually sat next to Ethan throughout the whole term, and they like became friends. And by the end of it, we're so sad we made friends in this class because like one of us is leaving. Yeah. But I was like so worried because like Peter was participating in class discussions, like doing the free writing assignments, but he like was not finishing a lot of the like weekly assignments that we did. And so I just had this assumption that like, oh, he's not going to give me very much to talk about, or like I'm not going to have much of a story for Peter. But in my dissertation I write like that's a really unfair assumption to make about any of my students, especially as a researcher when you're supposed to like have a very open mind and like welcome any and all changes that happen along the way. But I was very surprised by him by the time I read his final reflection for the class, because he had said to me earlier in a one-on-one conference that he was experiencing senioritis. So he never like said anything really about the class content. He was just like, oh, I'm not really into the assignments because like I just want to get my degree done. It's my last term. And then in his final reflection for the class, I was just like, whoa, this changes everything. Because he wrote, we spent a lot of time focusing on mental disabilities and the different topics revolving around the subject, along with the different voices who are present in current conversations. For me, I found it a bit difficult to relate and really get into the topic, as I personally have not experienced things or been exposed to topics that others in class have. So I find it difficult to relate, and I find it harder to really understand and get into the topic at times, end quote. So what's really interesting here is that he's working with like two specific boundaries, the boundary of his own identity and then the boundary of his peers' identity. So he's like, I'm someone who doesn't relate to this, so I'm not capable of fully understanding it, but my peers relate to this in a way that I don't, so they're capable of understanding it and connecting with it. And I just find that really interesting because, I mean, all of the students were like so kind and welcoming and like listened to each other carefully. But that also caused a lot of students to be really transparent and like comfortable talking about their experiences with mental disability. And I think that maybe was kind of jarring for him, but I don't actually know because I never asked him that. But that's like the really central like boundary that he's working with. And at the same time, he's kind of grappling with how he's defining mental disability and what it means for him. But although he had this like, he's such an interesting student, like so excited, because he had this like really clear disconnect that he reveals at the end of the term. He never mentions it at any other point until the end of the term. And it was like not very clear, obvious, because he didn't ever like shy away from engaging with the course readings or like trying to work with the concepts. He always was just like, I'm going to try my best to understand this. So like in his writing, at least 8 times, he said like variations of the phrase, hopefully that makes sense. And I was like, he clearly was uncertain, but he always had really like great answers and reflections and like used his own examples to like further understand things. Yeah, he was just always willing to like try things out and use like our free writing space and class discussions to try out how he was thinking about these things he reveals he didn't really relate to, which makes it really cool. But he then at the end of the term talks more about like how he has a lot of room to grow in thinking about mental disability conversations and wants to listen more to voices such as Margaret Price and fellow students within our class. And that did help him improve his understanding of the conversation. And I love that because it connects a lot actually to something that like Ethan said in his final reflection, where he was like, even if it's something that like maybe isn't relevant to students now, it at least like fosters that thinking in their mind and they can maybe access it later. And I'm like, he's on to something, right?
Absolutely.
He's on to something with this. And that's kind of what we see happening with Peter. And his like desire to learn more and to connect with peers and to connect with other people is really exciting and interesting, and just like says a lot about who he is as a person and like a learner. But it also shows how this sort of content or subject matter can be beneficial for all students, even if they're able-bodied, able-body-minded. Although he still sees his like identity as pretty fixed, like inflexible. He's not like taking on an identity as being mentally disabled himself. He is like allowing new like skills and knowledge to seep in, and sees himself as more capable, like engaging in those conversations, and supporting peers and like being a active listener, and just welcoming those conversations into his life, rather than seeing them as something he's like unable to touch because he doesn't have that experience. He's now like, okay, well, I'd be willing to listen more about this. So I think that that's something that felt really special about him, and is a really good example of just like questions I might get about like, what if this isn't helpful for students who aren't mentally disabled, right?
Right.
But he did find ways to connect some of those course discussions to topics that mattered to him. So he was really adapting the knowledge in creative ways to make it more meaningful to him. And I mean, he did good in the class, even though he didn't finish a handful of assignments. Not a handful, it was maybe like 3, but he was really cool. And it all kind of comes back to the same things as like Ethan, the class interactions, like class discussions, and then you can see where some of the readings are kind of coming together, and then interacting with his lack of experience with mental disability to then like develop this part of his identity that didn't really exist before. So I'm going to kind of wrap things up here as quickly as I can. I think what Peter, again, kind of like Ethan, really reinforced for me was that we need to focus a lot more on dispositions when we're looking at transfer. And especially when we're thinking about microtransfers, because those can just like shift so quickly in small moments in time. And those like different really small elements can impact, like the class environment, I think had a lot to do with what students took away, because like everyone was so welcoming, and just willing to share and like be vulnerable. And it just taught me a lot that like our prior knowledge and experiences just have like such a huge impact on what knowledge we take up, and then like how we value it, how we use it, and then, you know, what it ends up meaning to us and other people as well. But before I end, that just reminded me of like one of the coolest moments in this class, which was we read the article, The Body Mind Problem and the Possibilities of Pain by Margaret Price. And it has a section in it where it talks about like disability desirability. And that's connected a lot to like queer theory, conversations in queer theory. And I had a number of queer students in the class. They came out to each other in class, and were really transparent and vulnerable about it. But in that class, we didn't really talk that much at all about mental disability. It was really like a space for all the like queer students in the class to like talk to each other about issues they had in the queer community with like, I don't know, these sort of like stigmas or stereotypes or like things that they felt like they couldn't really say elsewhere, but could say to each other in a classroom space. And so like that was happening on that day. And then there was like one other student that day who disclosed like his brother being like pretty severely disabled. And so it was the most incredible class session, because it was the day I walked out of the class and I was like, we're connected. We're community now. So really cool stuff happens that I'm not going to be able to write about all of it. But I always get like kind of emotional thinking about that class because it was so just like profound.
So I just got I just got goosebumps again because in my undisclosed location, Hunter and I were office mates for a while, and I can remember, like, I'm so proud of you because I can remember Hunter coming back to the office and like me coming out of a class and being emotionally drained from having 24 students bleed all over and tell you these inner thoughts and people came out in my classes just like you said and stuff, and like it's emotionally, because you take that on, it's emotionally draining, and Hunter would be like, how do people in your class even like they said, like, how do they even come out, like how do they even say those things in your class? They tell you those things? I'm like, no, they tell each other those things, right?
Yeah.
And so now I hear it, however many years later, I hear you saying these things. I'm just so proud of you.
Thanks. Yeah, it was super cool. And like it's our responsibility to give them that space too. And it just felt so important. I like just kind of sat there. I was like, take it away. I'll call it like at break time. We'll go out in the hall, but otherwise, like, keep doing your thing because this is really great. And like it was still connected, but not as explicit. And it actually inspired the conversation or the research topic that the third student in that first theme ends up writing about. And it was just like really profound for her as well. And then one other student who participated in the conversation. And it was so cool too, because one of them, whose pseudonym is Foster, mentioned in their interview that after class, Ethan came up to them and was like, hey, thank you so much for like kind of leading that discussion. And it was just like, I don't know, so cool to see the support and like collective care coming out of that class.
And now your call to action is going to be, are you an Ethan or are you a Peter? Right? No, not really. That was a joke. We don't need that
one. Well, I know for a fact that we have Ethans and Peters listening right now, right?
That's very true. And and then I was also thinking, not to go on a sidetrack, but I was also thinking when we started this community, everything that Hunter just said, that's what we're like. We said, unlock the door and get out of the way, right? And because that's what I used to do in the classroom, is like, just stay out of their way and you can learn so much. And that's what we're trying to do here. And I heard it echoed back from Hunter, and it was lovely. All right,
and we do try to put, I mean, we've had so many episodes on mental health, like a surprising number of episodes on mental health, and so we're really trying to integrate that into these conversations as well, similar to how you're doing with your classes.
Wait till our book comes out. Oh my goodness.
No.
Let me know when you start working on that.
Oh, it started.
It's definitely started. We're doing a whole thing on inspiring people to write despite like any kind of
nevertheless.
Yeah, it's called Write Anyway. And so there's some mental health stuff in there.
Yeah, it's so important. I feel like I get away from it often as like a PhD student. It's like I'll be like, oh, I'm going to start journaling again. And I'll journal for like 4 days in a row really intensely. And then life just gets too busy. And it's like, I don't journal for 2 months.
Right.
And it just feels like, oh, it's going to take away from my time to work. And then it's going to impact like my attitude towards work. And then I'm going to feel more depressed. Like it just, also connected.
I relate to that.
Yeah.
All right, your call to action.
Okay, sorry. My call to action
don't apologize.
Has quite a bit of a preface, so I apologize. Right. So I have like, and I felt like it was important to have this preface just to like honor the people in my life right now. But really recently I've become a part of a community of people who are like super kind and inclusive and exciting and intelligent and just like like I was saying about the class, like they do a lot of really meaningful forms of like collective care for one another. And as someone who has like a lot of trauma, I have like historically had a really hard time like integrating into new communities, because as trauma survivors, you know, you can feel really alienated,
Mm-hmm.
and then connections are hard, and maintaining connections is hard. But I've been like really grateful for this group of people who has been like super patient and kind, and they're just like kind of teaching me and like giving me the space to like accept myself and also like allow myself to accept acceptance by them, like to feel accepted by them,
Yeah.
which
That
can
makes
often be
sense.
so hard. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, just allowing yourself to be accepted, because like I'm not so different from you, right? Like we've all had things go on. But I think one like especially incredible thing about them is like they're all really, I mean, they're all academics. They have graduate degrees. Some of them are pursuing their PhDs. One just completed his PhD. But they don't like let that intellect and like very obvious intelligence that they do have make them like judgmental or pompous or like do that sort of posturing that a lot of people in academia do. And it can just like lead to this like rigidity of like we're not allowed, like we're not allowed to say anything, we're not allowed to do anything, like we're not allowed to hug, we're not allowed to laugh, we're not allowed to like be goofy. And instead they like find a lot of ways to like have fun and like laugh and play with each other. And I think that's just something that like we all like have mentally beat out of us by this age, because
Mm.
we need to be taken seriously. But they've like just cultivated this space where like that's okay and it's safe. um, and that connects a lot to the most recent book I've been reading, which you guys might have read, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk. And what I've learned from that book, I'm not finished with that, I'm like 2/3 of the way through. But what I've learned from these friends and also that book is that like the real and perceived safety of our body matters like a lot for our healing.
Mm.
And so we need to like move our body really like meaningfully and intentionally, in order to heal. And so that's where my call to action comes in. And it's been something really useful for me. So my call to action is to move, but to make it intentional. So choose an activity that takes your focus towards your body, whether it's something like breath work, walking, dancing, you know, shaking around, tapping, and then give that activity an intention as well. So an example might be something like, you know, on this walk, I'm taking myself like one step further from X person who hurt me. Therefore, like I'm safer because they're there and I'm here.
Oh.
And so, like placing yourself in time and space is like incredibly useful. But I think it works best, I mean, for me personally, if it's an activity or like movement that makes you feel like a little uncomfortable or unusual, or even like potentially at risk of embarrassment, because often by the end of that thing and that activity I go, oh, I'm safe, like there was actually no risk in like doing that, like my body's safe and like emotionally I'm safe. And I think it's really important to like make that space for yourself, and then also like hopefully we all find people in our lives who like also help us build that space.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was important to like share a lot about those people because they've been like really important in like the past few months of my life even, and like have just really been helping me like trust people again and to like have hope in like human beings. Because they're just like absolutely incredible. But move
I love that so
is my call
much.
to action.
I love that. And I love the intentionality of it. So, our listeners, you can respond to that call to action in the show note or below our show notes on our website at writebettertogether.com/podcast. I've also just compiled all of our calls to action into one page called call to actions on our website. And so you can go there to find every single one of them and just like respond to them there, or you can respond on Facebook or in the YouTube comments. So we'd love to know how this goes for you.
Sweet. I'd love to know.
Yeah. Definitely share that with us. Hunter, thank you so much for all of this, for sharing your research. It was so in-depth and so just inspiring to see you working on that. And I feel like I learned so much. So thank you.
That was just fantastic, Hunter. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I was really nervous.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it ended up being fun. And like I said, so excited to talk about, all of the students, but like Peter's story has just been like so impactful for me. But yeah, thanks so much for having me and like giving me the space. But
absolutely. And,
nice
and also, if you could share any of the resources that you mentioned or that you would like to share with us, just send those to us and we'll put it in the show notes for our listeners so they can learn more.
Okay. I will do that.
I think we had another expert who didn't deny her expertise.
Yay!
She actually did research in her area of expertise.
Our listeners like to be like, I'm not an expert, but, or not our listeners, our guests.
Yeah. We introduce them as an expert in something and then they say they're not.
I'm not. Yeah.
Thank you, Hunter.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I told her this to her face, but I'm so proud of Hunter.
Oh, I love that.
And she got to see you. Like you've changed so much. You've grown so much. She's grown so much. I'm proud of both of you. I have not changed. I have not grown at all in 10 years. I'm the same as it ever was.
It hasn't been 10 years. It's been 5, I think.
Oh, okay. Same as it ever was. All right. What's next?
Hey, John Meyers.
Yes.
So I watched a documentary and I actually have multiple facts. But I'm going to ask you a few questions to get us there. So the first question is, there are 3 different animals besides humans that have been documented and studied using tools.
Okay.
Do you know what those 3 species are?
I know all 3. One would be a monkey. One, because you're Emily Brooks, so there's bound to be a bird. And then the third would be a weasel.
What?
A mole?
Did you just make that up or do you know this? Because it's not on my list, but should it be on my list? Am I leaving one out?
Say I violate the integrity of Hey John Meyers by making things up. Tell us what the real 3 are.
Okay, so you're correct about the first 2. The first one is primates.
Okay.
The second one is a crow.
Only crows use tools.
Well, I don't think that's quite accurate. That's what they said on this documentary, but I'm pretty sure there are several kinds of parrots that also use tools.
Oh.
And various more what are the crows called? Morbids or something. I don't remember. Morbids? That doesn't sound right.
Morbid bird?
Corvids. Other types of corvids that have done this. The third one is the topic of our Hey John Meyers. It is
it was not weasels.
No. It
Whales.
It is not a whale, but it does live in the sea. It's not a mammal.
SpongeBob SquarePants.
No. It's known for its many appendages.
Oh, it's either a squid or an octopus.
Ding, ding, ding. It's an octopus.
Did you know that one of them, their entire surface, I never remember if it's the squid or the octopus, their entire surface they see through their entire surface. Like their whole everything is eyes. Is one big eye. So if you ever see, if you ever see like a video of how a fly looks or how a bird looks coming out of both sides, when you see one from I think it's an octopus, but it might be a squid. When you see one from them, it's just like this shadowy thing because they see from everything. Everything is how they see.
So as for an octopus, what happens is their skin has sensory. So it may not be a visual sense, but it's like they sense light and change. So they're actually colorblind, but they can sense through their skin the various shifts in light and shades.
They can see a person coming from 360 degrees.
Wow.
Because they see from everywhere.
Wow.
And so, yes, I might be overstating it by saying it's eyes.
Well, it's kind of like saying that a bat sees through echolocation, right?
There you go.
It's not seeing in the same sense, but it is seeing.
But that's not why you came to this.
No,
part of the podcast.
That's your own. That's hey Emily Brooks. So this came from, okay, so I've talked in the past about Secrets of the Whales produced by James Cameron. Well, I just watched Secrets of the Octopus.
Oh my goodness.
Produced by James Cameron. Guess how octopuses, and guess what? They don't say octopi in the documentary. They say octopus or octopuses. Guess how they communicate?
When they meet each other. With their own octopus language.
What is that? How would an octopus say hi?
I almost said something I shouldn't have said.
Oh
no. Sign language.
That's a good guess. The way that if two octopuses meet each other, they give each other a handshake.
Yeah, I'm not buying it. You better have some video of this.
Oh, I should have had some video of this, but you all can watch the documentary because I highly recommend it. But basically they like hold each other for a minute, and that's how they sense their intentions. So if they're being aggressive, if they're just being curious, if they're flirting, they can tell by each other's touch.
So if this is true, which I have no reason to doubt you.
Hey.
And there's aggression, and you're like, because you said that could be one of them, or anger, or what? Like they still shake hands, and they're like, I better get out of here. This guy is not for me.
Yeah. There was actually a video of one where like it was the male's intention to like pursue this female, and she was like not having it, and she ran away.
Like you shouldn't even touch the guy then.
But I guess
I'm not blaming the woman. I didn't mean it that way. I meant that octopus should not touch the other octopus if they're dangerous.
Yeah, I don't know why they would do that unless like maybe she just wasn't impressed by him. But they don't.
Boundaries.
They're very solo creatures, and one of the fascinating things about them is, so I was talking about in the whale conversation, whales learn through their ancestors. So it's like ancestral information is passed down through the generations. Octopuses, their parents die immediately, and then they go off on their own, and they're basically on their own learning things. So they're really, really fast learners because they have to be. So that was another interesting thing. And then that I was already planning on just sharing that. But then at the end of the documentary, they're talking to James Cameron and kind of reviewing some of the footage, like behind the scenes, and they showed an octopus dreaming. And remember when we talked about dreams?
Yes.
In a previous Hey John Meyers segment?
Yes.
Well, they were like, they think that octopuses learn so quickly because they dream, and that helps them process memories and problem solve. And James Cameron then said, lots of my stories come from dreams.
Oh. So the previous episode that you're referring to is when you taught me about rapid eye movement.
Yeah.
And if a octopus skin is the one big entire eyeball, is their entire when they're dreaming, is their rapid eye movement their entire bodies?
No. They do have actual eyes. So I'm sure there's something going on there. But it was really cool, the footage of it, because it was like changing colors, and like you could tell when it was dreaming because it was acting like almost as if it was awake, the way that it was changing colors. It was very cool. But yeah, James Cameron, inspired by, like he said, there are several scenes in Avatar that are inspired by dream scenes.
Especially probably octopus dream scenes, since it's underwater.
And I've never said this, but my first book that I wrote was inspired by a dream. But it ended up being completely different.
I didn't know that. And so, are you going to tell me you saw an octopus while you were kayaking? Is that the word?
No, there are no freshwater octopuses.
That we know of.
That's it.
That's it. That's more than it. That was like
that was a lot of
three different things.
But there's so
about
many more
octopus.
fascinating things, so everybody needs to go. Oh, octopuses will also shake hands with people too, to check them out.
And will they also do the same thing? Like, oh, this is a creepy guy, and get out of there.
Apparently, so in the documentary, there's a woman that it like reached out and touched her, and I guess it sensed that she was safe because then it started grooming itself as if it didn't even care that she was there.
Ew.
That's like a sign of trust, though, that like because it was covering its eyes and stuff, like it just did not even care that the diver was there, so it was fully trusting. Now I'm done.
The things I learn on this podcast.
Everybody needs to go watch Secrets of the Whales and Secrets of the Octopus, and those are on their National Geographic, so they're currently on Disney Plus.
Is your goal for us to not ever eat an octopus by humanizing them, anthropomorphizing them?
Yeah, I don't like eating octopus for that reason.
But you're
I'm not like against it, but I just personally don't.
But you're okay with eating a weasel, apparently.
I would never eat a weasel. I don't even think that's legal.
All right. What's next?
Well, listeners, if you want to always make sure that you know when
what you can and cannot eat.
What you can and cannot eat, then make sure that you subscribe to our channel and to our podcast, wherever you're listening to the podcast, that you write us a review, because we would be forever grateful if you wrote us a review, because that's how people find us.
Yes.
And share us on your social media.
And if it's on the Spotify, follow us. And I just read a thing which I'm not familiar with, and so if Emily's not familiar with it, I'm gonna be putting her on the spot. But iTunes has changed how podcasts are followed. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, and so I don't know what the new way is, but however that new way is, do it, please.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Speaking of ringing the bell,
yes,
it's time for the final act.
Yay.
And today's final act is called Do You Ring the Bell?
Oh my goodness. Do I get to know the prize?
The prize is this light box.
I need one of those.
Because we're talking about mental health today.
Oh.
I got this light box from my parents for Christmas several years ago, and I use it every winter to make it feel like I have sunlight, because my husband calls me a sunflower because I need sun.
Yeah, those are cool.
Yep.
Good. That was a good present, parents.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. So there have been previous tasks that you've given me where I've said, I feel like I'm on Taskmaster.
Yes.
Which is a British comedy show where the people do weird tasks. So I'm going to give you a real task from Taskmaster.
Oh my goodness.
The show. And I might have to bleep some of this. But I'm going to share my screen. All right. So here is the task.
So before you start, I'm doing this task.
You are okay. So I know you don't have a bell. If I had thought ahead
bell,
of
but
time,
I gotta get up and get it.
I would have. You have a bell?
Yeah. You want me to get up and get it?
Sure. I was just gonna say, would you ring the bell or not?
I got up to get the bell, and it was literally right in front of me the whole time, because I was gonna do the ring the bell so you wouldn't forget.
What's funny?
I had it on the here, so
that's
yes,
amazing.
I have a bell. Okay, so
that you already had a bell, because I was just like, well, there's no way he has a bell, so I wasn't going to even ask you to ring a bell. I was just going to be like,
I was going to remind you to ring the bell, but then when that time came, I couldn't find it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, here is the task. Okay.
Do the opposite of the following.
All right. Notice he said, do the opposite.
Do the opposite of the following.
You must, under no circumstances, not avoid not making the bell not ring.
All right, I've got it written down on a different screen. All right, can you see that?
The opposite of the following. You must, under no circumstance, not avoid not making the bell not ring. So I must. I can't avoid it. So I must not not make the bell not ring. So the bell has to ring, is what I'm thinking. If I know the English language.
Now, the other part of the task is when you are done, you have to say, I am right, I am right, I am right 3 times. Is that your final answer?
Yes, my final answer is to not avoid not ringing that sentence.
All right, let's find out if you were meant to ring the bell or not.
There's 5 negatives. So not making the bell not ring is a double negative and comes to the same thing as making the bell ring. Not avoid is a double negative that renders itself redundant. We know this. Yeah. So you end up with, you must under no circumstances make the bell ring. Did you include the first line, which was do the opposite of the following? Oi. Which of course reverses the instruction of the paragraph that I analysed.
If you got that right at home, get out more.
So I'm supposed to say I'm right, I am right, I am right?
Yeah, I am right, I am right, I am right.
I'm right,
Congratulations,
I am right.
John Meyers. You won the light box, and also you beat several people on Taskmaster who did it incorrectly.
Several
because they forgot that it said
British
do the
people.
Opposite.
Yes. Several intelligent British people. That was great. And I like that light box. Sorry.
It's great. And guess what? It also has an ion button. You know the smell of rain?
Yes.
That's what it releases.
Oh, wow.
It smells like rain, and it is like just really soothing and great.
It's sunny and raining at the same time.
Sunny and raining at the same time.
And it makes a rainbow across the ceiling. All right. That was fantastic. I won a game.
Yay! And you learned about octopuses.
Yeah. Quite the episode. Say the thing. What?
How do we end this show again?
With that lovely catchphrase that's your favorite part of the show.
I never said that. We
couldn't have done it without you.